Hey Val, how's it going?
Not a whole lot.
All right. So we're gonna talk about the 2020 California propositions.
Yes.
There's a lot of them this year.
A ton.
So I'm sure most people are wondering what they're gonna vote for, and these propositions are usually confusing. So
They're very confusing.
yeah, that's the whole point of us doing this.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah, also, because a lot of times I feel like people are so, oh, especially for general elections, right? Their main focus is the presidential candidates, whether you're going to vote between one or the other. But I think a lot of times we also forget that there's a ton of propositions on the ballot that beyond, who becomes the president, that affects our livelihood. So hopefully with this, we can break some of it down. We'll break down our opinions of them, why we're voting a specific way. And of course, if we disagree, we'll have some nice conversation on why.
Yeah, so just a reminder, we don't know what the other is voting for. So this is the first time. So this is the first time we're gonna hear each other's picks leading up to the election.
Yes.
So what we'll do is we'll take turns. So one of us will introduce the proposition. We'll say whether or not we're voting yes or no and the reasons why.
Yeah.
And then give the other person an opportunity to agree with the vote or disagree and state their reasons why.
Yeah. If you're watching this on video, we have our laptops in front of us.
Right.
Because we have notes on them. We didn't want to just come in all willy-nilly. We wanted to have some good conversation, good meaningful conversation around this. And I think it's also might be fun if we talk about our high level views, like whether we're, I don't know, most people are like, well, I'll go first. So I am registered Democratic. I'm not a fan of labels per true millennial fashion. But I would say that I am morally liberal and fiscally conservative for the most part. I think that kind of captures how I vote. Usually.
Usually. I'm the same. Socially, very liberal. And I don't know if this is just a product or something you can't really avoid, is that I find the older I get, the more economically conservative I'm becoming. And it's kind of like a tug of war I'm playing. And I think it's just because of how your lifestyle changes as you get older.
Right.
You find more benefits in a conservative economic approach, but not always. There's a nice balancing act.
Of course.
But that's just a little background on us. So let's jump in. So you want me to introduce the first one? You want to go first?
Sure.
Okay.
Why not?
All right. The first one is Proposition 14.
It's called Stem Cell Research Bond.
Stem Cell Research Bond. So this proposition is on the ballot to, hold on, let me read this, issue $5.5 billion in bonds for State California Stem Cell Research Institute. The floor is yours.
So this one I actually went back and forth on. I am a true believer in research, and I think that we have quite a bit of ways to go in terms of medical research. I do think that the focus specifically on stem cell is very much necessary, but I don't like the way that this approaches it, and so I would actually vote no. And I have a couple things here in my notes, but so this program has started back in 2004, so we're here, 16 years later, and I feel like not a whole, granted, we have done quite a bit in stem cell, but I've not seen that come to fruition in terms of patient care and what we can do for them. And for me, I did quite a bit of research looking into okay, who supports this, who opposes it, who even wrote it. And, when I looked into it, the person who wrote the bill is a real estate developer or investor, I should say. And I just don't see why that person would be writing the bill. Like, it should be the board of this institute, so that they have, a clear vision of what they're going to do moving forward. And from the research that I have, it seems more like they just want more money and don't know what they're going to do with it, So it kind of seems almost like, and not to knock anything, but it seems like a startup where it's like, well, we need more money because we need it, but we're not sure what it's going to go towards yet. And so I feel like this is just kind of a waste, not necessarily a waste, but I think it's a misallocation of funds for it to be paid in bonds and put that, the having to pay it back and stuff back on the state of California, which means us, the residents, because that's, we're paying our taxes and everything. But I just don't think that this is the right way to do it. I think if they were to be, as maybe like a nonprofit and get grants and funds that way, because you can get federal grants still, I think that would be a better approach. But I think putting the onus on California residents, to me, doesn't make sense when we're not necessarily reaping the benefits from it. Like, a stem cell research program should make findings that we can then put into our patient care and have it be accessible. Right now it's not. Stem cell research costs so much money, and even the bonds here, doesn't say anything about making it more equitable and accessible for people who truly need it. So that's why I would vote no.
All right. I vote no as well.
Oh, nice.
All right. So we're off to a good start in agreement.
Perfect.
So that's good. I agree with everything you said. Just to add, $5.5 billion is not a little bit of money.
No.
Especially in the form of bonds.
Right.
And for people who don't know what that means, is that California wants to borrow that money and pay it back with interest. And they borrow it from the state federal bank or from its citizens who want to purchase those bonds.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there is, especially in a post-COVID world, COVID and the pandemic is going to play a huge factor in a lot of people's decisions on how they vote on these things.
Yes.
And in a post-COVID world, there's definitely better places to spend $5.5 billion.
Right.
And there's already a ton of government money and grants at universities already doing tons of research. So just to reallocate another $5.5 billion after 16 years of them doing this already, it's just not the time. So that's why I'm voting no as well.
Yeah, and I have in my notes here, which I thought was very important, but there's no legislative oversight on this particular, I forget what it is, but it's the Stem Cell Research Institute or whatever it's called. There's no legislative oversight, so what ends up happening is that, people on the board can take salaries for whatever amount they want. So in comparison to some of like our public roles, say like the governor of California or the director of NIH, people in this institute are making much more money than these people, and then a specific portion of the funds would also allow them to expand their board from 29 people to 35, which to me doesn't make sense. Like, if you can't figure it out with a group of 29 people governing, why do you need more? So another reason why I was voting no. All right, anything else?
That's it. Let's move on.
Okay, so Prop 15, the tax on commercial industries and properties. So this proposition requires commercial and industrial properties to be taxed based on market value and dedicates revenue back into the community. I believe it specifically goes into education.
All right. So I am going to vote no on this proposition.
Okay.
I'm totally against double taxing. So anytime you've already paid tax on something, or your tax should be based on the price that you purchased something for. So I don't think your tax should be adjusted just because the thing that you bought increased in value. And taxes already go up based on the rate of inflation for property. So, because if inflation goes up 2%, that means you're paying 2% tax. So the amount of tax you're paying already goes up based on inflation. So to have that be tied to the market value, meaning if I bought this piece of real estate for $1 million and I'm paying tax 2% on it every year for that $1 million, but next year or the year after or in 5 years or in 10 years that property is worth $3 million, now I'm supposed to pay tax on $3 million even though I still own that piece of property that I purchased at the time for $1 million. So I'm against double taxing, and that's why I'm voting no.
Nice. Well, I am the opposite.
We're already switching.
Here we go.
Okay.
Number 2, and we're going at it.
All right.
So I would actually vote yes for this one. And so I was looking at, the text of it specifically, and I just included a little summary here. So it increases the property taxes on commercial properties that are worth more than $3 million. It leaves exemptions for property that is classified as commercial agriculture, for properties that are residential, and also protected open space exemptions. So for me, it felt like this wasn't going to affect the, the lower middle class. I do feel like it is imposing some taxes on some of the larger corporations. And so that's why I'm voting for yes, because I think, we have Silicon Valley, Silicon Beach, we have all of these companies coming in. I think of Amazon and all of the warehouses that they've bought in the space, and how little taxes they pay overall. And I feel like this is a good way, at least in California, for us to tax some of those businesses and reap the benefits so that it goes back into the local economy, because I think that's where a big gap is. And the money that, for me, so it makes more sense, to tax some of these larger corporations, companies like Walmart, Amazon, Disney, things like that, instead of imposing taxes on residents. So for me, that's the way that I see it. And then I also wanted to call out, so I like looking at who supports it, who opposes it, so that I can generally see, am I in line with some of these other people who might have the same values that I align with. So I noted in here some noteworthy supporters include Cory Booker, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Dolores Huerta, and the ACLU. So for me, I was looking at it overall and I was like, well, I generally agree with what their values are and what they're thinking moving forward. And so I would vote yes.
Okay. All right.
Any rebuttals?
I'll add one thing. So this potentially could exasperate California's reputation of not being business friendly.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I thought about that too, and I went back and forth with it.
Yeah, so if I'm completely honest, it's 50-50 for me, but I'm just because of California being in the position that it is right now and the trends that are happening with businesses looking to find avenues away from this state, I don't think, let's not give them one more reason to do it is my thing.
Yeah.
But I do agree with a lot of what you said. So,
I mean,
so we're pretty close.
Right, yeah. I do find it difficult for businesses to be in California. I mean, my family, we grew up as business owners, so I completely understand the argument, but I also think it's California. If you're gonna come, you're going to come, and there's just there's no way around it. West Coast is the best coast. I know I'm gonna get a lot of haters, but I do think we should be having people pay their fair share. How many millions of dollars do these corporations make? So.
Okay.
All right. On to the next.
Proposition 16.
So this one's called repeal affirmative action.
This one is, I think, going to be very confusing for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
And by the time we're done talking, hopefully it's not even more confusing. But let's dive in. So this is the affirmative action proposition for California. It repeals Position 209 that was put into place in 1996, which says that state of California cannot discriminate or grant preferential treatment based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, or national origin in public employment, education, or contracting. So everybody's seen this. Anytime you've ever applied for a job, it says that we don't discriminate based on race, sex, color, ethnicity, national origin, and etc. So this is going to repeal that so that the employers can now exercise affirmative action without it being discrimination.
Right. All right. So this one was definitely confusing. I went back and forth on it because at first I kind of like went with my gut, and my immediate response was to vote no. And I think it's because of the title, because it's repeal affirmative action. And when I hear that, automatically I think, well, hang on, we're not at an equal footing when we look across, race, gender, religion, things like that. And so for me, in my mind, it was like, well, wait a minute. Affirmative action should be helping the groups who are, disenfranchised at, maybe a lower opportunity to get into some of these spaces. And as I was reading into it more and more, then I found, well, I should actually be voting yes on this. So I would vote yes. And I think it's because the way that it's phrased makes it confusing. So, when we're looking at Prop 209, and this is looking straight into, some of the text itself, and also on Ballotpedia, if you guys...
So Prop 209 was the one in 1996
right.
that 16 is going to do away with.
Yeah. And so I think Prop 209 ended up passing because it had kind of a deceiving name to it, and just like this one's very confusing, so it's hard to understand. And it states that neither discrimination nor preferential treatment can be given based on sex, gender, or religious beliefs. And it wasn't necessarily about advancing the civil rights. And so for me, it's like, well, what's the point of it? Actually, it's not helping anyone. And so for me, I would vote yes on Prop 16 to repeal it, so that we then start to actually focus on some of these civil rights and, advancing disenfranchised groups who may not have equal footing, and who, let's face it, we don't have an equitable system. So helping those people so that we can have more equal footing throughout, and just, a better society overall, at least in my opinion. Some of the notable supporters that I wanted to call out for this were Bernice King, Dolores Huerta, and again, the ACLU. And then interestingly enough, when I was looking at the opponents of Prop 16 and some of their reasons behind it, it was so hard for me, because reading it was like, well, hold on, some of these are like the Chinese American Civic Action Alliance, and then even some of the officials, Melissa Melendez, Ling Chang, and I was looking through like their reasons on why they oppose it. And I think part of why I was so like heartbroken by it was because we're often, like, minority groups are often pitted against each other, and that's exactly what I feel like is happening in this proposition. A lot of it was, the Asian American groups were opposing it because in their framing of how this prop happens is that it takes away from their space, because as a minority, they're an overrepresented community. So by repealing this would then take away their space in order to make space for others, which I think is a completely false narrative. Like, there's plenty of space for all of us. We can all win together. And I think to align against it goes back to that where it's us versus them kind of mindset, and like pits us all against each other when really we shouldn't. Like we're all minorities in this world together. Like whether, I don't agree with that labeling itself, but we are all of us trying to fight to have space in this world, in the jobs, in doctors, so in representation in entertainment and media, different things, and I just don't see how this is happening. So I would vote yes to repeal affirmative action.
All right. I am going to disagree. I am voting no to repeal Prop 209 from 1996.
I'm very surprised.
I did go back and forth on this one too. And so this is how my thought process took place to get to know. So the first thing I did is I thought, how was everything before 1996? So before this proposition was put in place, the insinuation is that affirmative action was effective in that it was, because there's two pieces to it, right? There's the discrimination piece, and then there's the preferential treatment piece. So you can't discriminate, but you can still grant preferential treatment. So that's the assumption that's being made if this prop passes. You're saying that these corporations are not going to discriminate, even though now you're giving them the freedom to, but give preferential treatment. So I don't think you should give them that power. So looking at how much progress has been made after this proposition has passed, I think we are on the right track. I think it's better, at least in the eyes of the hiring managers and the employers, to keep it as objective as possible. Because if you open that door and cross your fingers and hope that everybody's going to do the right thing and give everyone preferential treatment that deserves to have preferential treatment because they have been so disenfranchised and disadvantaged leading up to today's time, you're opening up a can of worms that, if history is any lesson and the last 4 years are any lesson, people will run with that in a negative way. So it's tricky in that there's tons of upside, but there's tons of downside too. So I think just leave it the way it is and continue to hit the ground running and do the work that we've been doing to bring everyone on equal footing in the way that we've been doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from. I think for me, knowing, like...
Are you sure? Because, yeah.
Well, we've been in quarantine too long together.
Not long enough. I could do this forever.
Sure. When we go back to thinking about, before affirmative action took place, Prop 209, and even to now, yes, we have made some progress, but I think even in the small progress that we've made, I feel like it's not, considering how many years we've been trying to have affirmative action. When you look at like leadership of the different corporations, even in my own experience, working at NFL, working now at a large corporation in market research, most of them, the leadership, if not all, throughout, and this is not just my company, this is a ton of other companies, it's typically white and male. And so for me, I don't think we've gained enough traction to really call it progress, because we see the same things happen where the entry level, the low level, low education, low talent, whatever positions are filled, and that's like, okay, we have enough minorities, we have a diverse group there, but when we get to the leadership, we're not seeing it come to fruition. And so for me, I do think we still need to have that focus on affirmative action in its true intent, and having a diverse group, not just race and gender, but also, beliefs and backgrounds. Like a Latina, grew up in, we're working middle class, I would say. My family were business owners. I have a very different livelihood and grew up a different way than someone who maybe Latino from Texas or Latino from like South Central LA. Like, we all live different lives, and because of that, like, even though we are technically Latino or Latina, we would have different viewpoints. And so I think that's where we need to still make more and more progress, in my opinion. So
All right.
I'd vote yes, you'd vote no. We all want equality.
Yeah, it's this is more of the end. We have the same end in mind,
Right.
but we disagree on this means, right?
Yeah, the means of getting there. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay. Am I starting? So Prop 17. This is the Voting Rights Restoration for Persons on Parole amendment. And so this restores the right to vote to people who are convicted of felonies who are on parole.
I absolutely vote yes on this.
High five.
Absolutely.
We agree on another one.
I mean, this is huge. All right.
is.
So, criminal or not, anyone who served their time and is out on parole should be granted the right to participate in the democracy in which they live.
Yeah.
Period.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Not to mention that this disproportionately affects communities of color.
Yes.
All right. So if you
Absolutely.
think about the number of people incarcerated are people of color, the mass majority, you have now tipped the scales away from that community
Yes.
in terms of having a say in society. And there is no, violent crime or non-violent crime. There's no stipulations here that gives one person access or not another person access to be able to vote.
Mm-hmm.
So I absolutely think that they should have the ability to vote if they're out on parole. Not to mention that these people probably have insight into that world if there's ever votes that need to happen for policing,
Right.
for prisons, how money is spent there, what's happening there. They have an insight on that, and the average person does not. So to have the average person be the only ones who have a say about what happens in that world,
Right.
that's not right. So absolutely, I vote yes. Definitely let convicted felons who are out on parole the ability to exercise their democratic right.
Yeah. Yep. I agree 100%. And because I think, going to prison, being a criminal, whatever you're convicted of felon, shouldn't be, a forever punishment. I think at its core, the whole reason with, the judicial system was that, part of it would be for rehabilitation, and we would try to get people to be citizens again, working citizens of the society. And if you take away the right to vote forever, where is the rehabilitation in that? So I think, yes, definitely granting them their votes, their right to vote. And then another thing that I think is we're seeing more timely right now than anything, people who are leaders, activists, protesters are now very commonly getting charged with felonies. And so like one specific example that I was looking at recently was Tiana Arata in San Luis Obispo, just north of us in Northern California, was getting charged, I believe it was like 13 felonies because she was organizing a protest, and somebody, they're not even sure it's connected to the protest itself, but somebody caused damage to the properties. I think they like hit a car with like a skateboard or something. I'm not even sure of the full details, but they were charging her and another person, I want to say it's Elias, I can't remember the last name, they were charging them with felonies. And for me, it's like, why? And we see it now because of, you know, I can't believe we came to this conclusion, but with Breonna Taylor and the decisions that were happening there, and we have, you know, state government employees being charged with felonies because they're out protesting the decision, which I am completely with them. Like, they should absolutely 100% protest it. Like, I can't even, I mean, I wish I could be surprised that they made that decision for Breonna Taylor, but that's neither here nor there. It's a completely different tangent that I hope we can talk about.
So it's important to remember, though,
right,
in that situation where protest organizers, great example, get convicted of a felony, whether you agree or not why it was they were convicted, whether or not they should have been convicted, what happened, all that is irrelevant, because this prop if this prop doesn't pass, it continues to take their ability away to vote.
Yeah.
Right? So I organized the protest and now I can't vote. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So convicted felons who are out on parole, yes, they should absolutely be able to vote.
Yeah. And to clarify, we don't think anyone who is protesting or an activist or leading these kinds of things should be convicted with a felony. Like, absolutely not. They're exercising their rights just as the rest of us should. But the truth is that it's happening. And so I think for this, it's very timely. Like, yeah, give them their right to vote. 100%. Absolutely.
It's like one of the pillars, right, of our democracy, our ability to vote, peaceful transition of power, and our ability to assemble and protest.
Yes.
So absolutely. Yep. All right. Next, 18. It's my turn, right? I lost track. All right, it's my turn to read it out. Okay. Proposition 19.
18.
Proposition 18. Proposition 18. So Proposition 18 allows, so if it passes, this would allow 17-year-olds who will be 18 at the time of the next general election to vote in the primaries and special elections.
So for this one, I voted yes. I would hope that it's clear. The new laws, regulations, everything that will be voted on is going to affect their livelihood as they enter adulthood anyways. And, you know, you're right on the brink of it. Granted, I mean, we're 30 years old and I don't think we're adults. But I still think that they should be allowed to vote if they're going to be 18 by the time the next general election comes in. So, yep.
I 100% agree. I actually really like this, and kudos to, you know, shame on me, I didn't look up who wrote it, but kudos to whoever introduced this proposition. It just makes sense to me. Like, if I'm 17 in January and the primaries take place in June, but I don't turn 18 until September, I'm not allowed to have a say in the November election because I have to wait. That's like your parents telling you that you get to pick any car you want, but it has to be these two colors that we've predetermined for you.
Right.
You know, so it just doesn't make sense to me. If I'm going to be voting in the primaries, then I should have a say in who the people in those primaries are leading up to it. So, Prop 18, we both say yes.
Very nice.
Okay.
Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. All right. That was a good one. Gotcha.
Lemon squeezy.
All right. Prop 19. Property tax transfers, exemptions, and revenue for wildfire agencies and counties. So this proposition would change tax assessment transfers and inheritance rules.
If it wasn't clear from Prop 15, when it comes to taxing, I do tend to lean conservative in this area. So I think Prop 19 would severely handicap millennials. And because these inheritance laws are technically going to be applied to the um, properties and assets that our generation is going to inherit
Right.
and leave for the generation that follows us. So California already has some of the strictest property tax laws. We don't need to make it even less desirable to live here. So keep it the way it is, and do not increase the taxes on inheritance. I know they frame these props and saying that the extra tax will get funneled to these agencies to fund them, but I think there's better ways to do it. Cutting costs is just as effective as increasing the bill, increasing the prices, because the price is the tax. It's better just to cut the cost down. So I vote no on Prop 19.
Awesome. I would also vote no.
No way.
Right.
I thought you were gonna vote yes on this.
Oh wow! I'm surprised.
Yeah.
Don't hurt the people.
Don't hurt the people.
Yeah, I agree. I think for this one, because it goes back to, you know, the properties of the residents, like, it doesn't make sense to me why, if my mom and dad bought a house, paid the taxes, everything's paid off, if they pass it down to me, why would I need to then pay it again?
Exactly.
And I think it goes back down to when we think about, you know, in terms, I'm always thinking about this mindset of like minority groups, but it's because that's who I am. It's who I relate to. And I think that this proposition would further harm that group, like you said, millennials, but I think also minorities who, you know, Black, Indigenous, people of color, who are just now getting to that area of wealth and generational wealth, because not a lot of us had it I don't want to say handed to us, but we didn't have it in our families, and so we're establishing it now, and I think this proposition puts that into harm. So
yeah, you should have the ability to realize the gains that everyone prior was able to realize for the last century,
Yeah.
right? So they weren't double taxed. Why
Right.
should the next generation?
Exactly.
Especially when the next generation is an up and coming minority generation.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yep. So we both agree. Vote no. Prop 19. I ain't gonna pay taxes twice, honey.
No double taxing. Okay. Moving on. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more to go. We're halfway.
We're almost there.
We're
making
halfway.
good progress.
Okay. Proposition 20. So this is a DNA proposition. So what this is, it makes changes to policies related to criminal sentencing, changes, prison release, and DNA collection. This one's a little confusing, so I'm gonna
This is very confusing.
I'm gonna clarify it a little bit more. So a yes vote supports this initiative to add crimes to the list of violent felonies for which early parole is restricted. Recategorize certain types of theft and fraud crimes as wobblers, which means that they are chargeable as either a misdemeanor or a felony. It could go either way for the same exact crime. And require DNA collection for certain misdemeanors as well. So, and a no vote would, of course, oppose it.
Yeah. So this one was very, very confusing. I had to look a number of times through the text itself because for me, I wasn't understanding it. But ultimately, once I got all my research done, I would vote no on this. I think that it's just another approach to mass incarceration and harsh sentencing. What I feel like what's being done with this prop is that it's another, you know, fear-mongering proposition. So, like, get DNA from the sexual violent offenders and those who are harming our children and who are, like, sex traffickers, things like that. Like, yes, absolutely, those people should be targeted for sure. Get all their DNA and put them in the system. But when I was looking into it further, they also want to get the DNA of some, like, what I would see as petty crimes, you know, like store theft, and then also for drug possessions. Like, I don't understand why you need DNA for those kinds of crimes when, I mean, and I go back to, like, we already have a large body of Black and brown people massively incarcerated. And a lot of times the drug possessions, they're more harshly sentenced than a white person with the same amount of drugs on their bodies. Like, for me, it doesn't make sense. So I think this would only increase the harm that's already being done. And then I also looked at, like, who is opposing this to see if I, in fact, was understanding it correctly. And people like the ACLU are also opposing this. So for me, I was like, all right, cool. I'm aligned with, for the most part, what the ACLU believes in. So for me, I would vote no.
I'm also voting no on this. Yeah,
Nice.
This one was super confusing. And the DNA portion kind of throws you off. But,
Yeah.
But this bill or this proposition would actually, the main thing to focus on is that it's going to add an entirely new list to the violent felonies list, which would restrict early parole for certain crimes. So the crimes that are currently not considered violent felonies would now be considered violent felonies.
Yeah.
And like you said, this is going to greatly increase the mass incarceration problem that we already have. And it would, again, disproportionately affect people of color.
Yep.
This would work if we didn't have the problem of mass incarceration.
Yeah, if we had a fair justice system, which
we
do.
But it would only be adding fuel to the fire that's already burning.
Yeah.
It's like throwing gasoline on a fire trying to put it out.
Right, exactly.
Like, hey, we got this fire hose that's connected to a propane tank or a fuel tank, and we're gonna try to use this to blow out the fire.
Right.
It's not gonna work. So once we fix that, then we can look at passing something like this. But it's important to note that the ACLU, law enforcement, anti-prison funding, they all oppose it.
Right. Yeah. Don't do it.
So we both vote no on Prop 20.
Mm-hmm. All right. Prop 21.
Prop 21. Oh, Prop 21. Oh my gosh. This one's gonna poke a lot of nerves, people. Get ready. Get ready for Prop 21. All right.
Oh, yeah. So this is the local rent control initiative. So what this proposition would do would expand local government's power to use rent control. A very popular topic that I think comes up every single year on our ballots. So how would you vote?
I would vote no. Okay. I am, again, socially liberal.
Right.
Economically conservative.
Yeah.
So this is as gray an area as it gets in between those two areas. So a little background on this proposition. What it's going to look to do is, so rent control already exists in California for the cities that wish to have it. But there is a law in place that says that it's called cost of hawking. So that says that any brand new piece of residential real estate that was built after 1996 is not subject to any rent control. So if you live in a house that was built prior to 1996 and you're a renter, then you fall under rent control if the city which you live in has rent control laws. For example, Los Angeles, I think, is 2.5% or 3.5%. They're allowed to increase every year. But if you live in a brand new apartment building, they can increase it as much as they want. Doesn't mean they're going to. So that's they might, but they usually don't. So that's why I vote no. I think if you start putting price restrictions on goods and services, especially when it comes to real estate. So yes, rent is out of control in California, but there is a fundamental law that governs the economy. All right. So supply and demand is really at the root of everything, including rent control. So supply being how many pieces of real estate is available for renters to be able to rent, and demand is how many renters are here, how many people want to live in this neighborhood. Right. So the more people that live in that neighborhood, the more prices are going to go up. The more people want to buy masks, the more expensive masks are going to come up. So that's basically the theory behind rent control. So if you increase supply, meaning you build more properties, then you allow landlords to start becoming price competitive with one another. So if I own real estate and I'm charging rent that's $1,500 a month, but the guy across the street has a rent controlled property, I'm no longer competitive because that person across the street has no incentive to leave that property because they know they're in rent control. I can't even entice them to leave by dropping my rent lower because they have a fear that I could all of a sudden raise it on them again. So I think when it comes to rent, supply is the problem, and the only way you control prices is by increasing supply. Supply and demand is what it comes down to. If you restrict prices, then you have no incentive for people to even build higher quality products. If I'm told that my burger is only allowed to be $1, then what incentive do I have to make a burger that's worth $10, $20, $50 if I'm only able to charge one? So I would vote no on rent control. I think it exasperates the problem. So no on Prop 21.
So we're back to disagreeing.
Uh-oh.
So this one, I think my mindset is definitely, the corona economy, like being in a pandemic and people being out of work and not being able to put a place over their heads. And so I would vote yes, because, housing insecurity it's such a serious, large issue, and it only seems to be getting progressively worse. Like, it feels like we're not addressing this issue at hand. Especially right now during this pandemic where we have so many people at risk of not having a place to live. Like, we looked at, I forget what was in the news, but people in Texas were being evicted because they were affected by layoffs during the pandemic, and it was so hot that they had to have their family sleeping in a running car to have AC. Like, I just don't see how right now, given all of the factors, we don't implement this. And so for me, I would vote yes, because I think this could be a temporary solution until we start really addressing the large gap between, the lower working class and the top 1%. Like, there's such a huge gap that the distribution of wealth doesn't make sense to me. And so this could be one of the means to an end. I don't think it should be a forever solution, but I do think in terms of now and where we are, I think it could be a temporary solution that could help us make progress and move forward until we get to, a better place with the gap in wealth becoming less and less.
Okay. I do have more to say as a rebuttal, but I'm not gonna say.
Well, I mean, we probably should, because some other things that I wrote down here, because in my mind I was like, okay, well, they still allow rent to increase up to 15% over 3 years at the start of tenancy. So for me, I'm like, all right, well, you can still, go and increase the rent at, a reasonable, percentage, over time, and then people who own no more than 2 houses are exempt. So I'm like, all right, in a lot of cases now we're seeing people from out of state, out of country investing in real estate property here, and I'm like, well, if they're getting these large apartments, like we live in a high rise with 100 units, why not have rent control if they're just going to make a shit ton of money and they can pick and choose the rent, the rate at which they're renting these places at? Because then I also go back to when I first was starting my career and I was moving out to LA, and I was telling you the story yesterday actually. Moving out to LA for me, I'm not a big LA fan. So apologies, but it's definitely a place just like Silicon Valley where you go and that's kind of like the starting point of your career. And so that's what I was approaching it as. But when I got there, it was so incredibly expensive. Like, I lived in a place in the hood, like the hood. I didn't want my mom and dad to see it because they probably wouldn't allow me to live there. So for me, it's like, as a working person starting out her career on a single income, having to live in the hood with a ton of other people, guys that I didn't know, like, it's not a safe environment for me at all, to the point where, like, I just would not go out in the evenings. And so, had rent control been in place, there may have been a better quality apartment in a better location that I could live on as, starting out my career. Like, and so often I think we go back to, like, I think about my mom and I going back and forth in our arguments, and, like, well, this is how people become lazy. And I don't think people, like humans, are naturally lazy. I think that's an excuse that people just throw around. But, I am trying to progress my career, trying to make my way through life and become, a good person of society. Like, I should still be able to afford rent in a fairly decent place.
But this does not do that. So what rent control really does is it restricts the landlord from increasing rent prices to a market value based on the demand that exists. All you have to do is do a quick Google search, look at the highest demand areas in cities that have rent control, and see how much more expensive the rent there is compared to cities that don't have rent control. And the reason for that is, to give you a practical example, if I own a piece of property, right? And if I'm gonna rent this property out and I know that the second I get a tenant in here, my hands are tied in terms of how much rent I could charge. My hands are tied in allowing somebody else to come in and price this person out. So I'm gonna make sure that my rent is at the maximum, and I'm not going to negotiate or anything like that, because once they get in, I know the chances of them leaving and me getting higher rent for years to come are going to be very minimal. So I do agree that we do have a rent problem. We do have a housing problem. But this is like seeing there's a leak in the boat and drilling another hole to see if that leak is going to close. It's just creating, it's not solving a problem, it's creating an entirely new problem. So that's why I think this is not the way to do it. There's other ways to incentivize landlords to drop prices. And then you got to think about it too. What incentive do I have to build a high quality product or to renovate my house and provide a good sustainable living if my hands are tied in how much I could charge? I'm gonna invest all this money to provide quality housing, and I'm not gonna get any return on it, or the return that I get is restricted to what the government says it is. So
Yeah.
okay, I could do 5 hours on this one. So
I mean, yeah, I just think, again, I don't think it's a long-term viable solution, but I do think that it would help in terms of now, because if you, like, LA, yes, is in very high demand, but I think if we had, like, one rent across LA, then people wouldn't be able to afford to live, like, in the places closer to where they're working, as opposed to, like, living out in the outskirts where people are driving. I mean, I know it's LA, so driving 2 hours is, like, I could technically still be, like, 15 miles away from work, but more often than not, it's, like, they're literally, like, 30 miles away from work, which I know for a lot of people is not a big deal, but when you're thinking about, wear and tear on your car, you're thinking about the output that's coming from transportation getting to that place, output of your own vehicle. Like, I think it goes back into, like, climate change and, like, what's sustainable and everything. And for me, it's like, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I would much prefer for companies to pay a livable wage, but since that's not happening.
And that's not on the ballot.
And that's not on the ballot. I wish we could like twist their arms to
We
pay
did
us
pass
fairly.
minimum wage though.
We-
It's gone
yeah.
up a little bit.
Right.
Just a little bit.
It has gone up a little bit, but I still think there is. I mean, it's unrealistic to think of someone can like make their life on 35 grand a year in the state of California. Like that just doesn't work. So for me, this was one way to get a means to an end. So I'd vote yes.
Okay.
But you would vote no.
I would vote no. I would vote 3 no's if I could. Okay. Prop 22.
Okay.
All right. So this is the pretty much this is the Lyft and Uber proposition is what this
Yes.
is. Okay. So this Proposition 22
I get comfortable.
considers app-based drivers to be independent contractors and enacts several labor policies related to app-based companies. So the government in California decided to pass a law which classified Uber, Lyft drivers, and app-based contractors to now be considered employees, and they would fall under the same rules as if anybody else working any job.
Right.
And this completely flipped their business model on its head.
Yeah.
So also important to note that no other proposition has had as much money thrown at it as this one has. This one has had, I think when I saw it, it was like almost $200 million
Yeah.
they've spent on this proposition.
On both sides.
Yeah. Well, mainly on the yes
yes.
side. A lot more on the yes side. So, yeah, go for it.
All right. So for this one, the app-based drivers as a contractors and labor policies initiative, which is probably what you'll see when you're looking at the ballot. This one I would vote yes. So maybe we should go into what a yes means. So a yes vote supports this ballot initiative to define app-based transportation and delivery drivers as independent contractors and adopt labor and wage policies specific to app-based drivers and companies. So basically I sided with Uber and Lyft.
Yeah.
I would vote yes, side with Uber and Lyft, because I think, we should keep the flexibility with drivers. So I think in many cases we have people who are working for these apps either as like a side hustle or just extra income to have the income, or even if they do it full time, they do it at their own schedule when they feel like doing it, to get however much money they see fit. Not everyone's trying to get like 80, 100, 30 a year to make sure that they have that living,
Right.
Everyone's bar is different. And so for me, I was in support of it, vote yes, because I don't know, requiring them to be full-time employees feels like you're requiring them to report back to the man. It's like some people are just using this to fight against that, and
Exactly.
some people just don't want to work for a company. Like if they did, I'm sure they could go elsewhere.
I 100% agree. I would also vote yes. They app-based employees are not employees because they are contractors. Think of it this way. You remember that time you got a job and you were able to come and go as you pleased, not show up one day, show up the other day, and you had no boss to report to? You remember that job you had?
I mean, I wish I had that job. But
You know why you haven't? Because that's an independent contractor. So app-based drivers are independent contractors. To call them employees is just, it's the opposite of common sense. 2 + 2 does not equal 3.
Right.
So California, I don't know what you were thinking when you passed this. Like, it just made no sense to me. I don't know how it happened. And there's hardly anybody that supports this. Everybody was pissed when it happened. So
yeah.
vote yes on Prop 22 to keep Uber and Lyft the way it is. Or the way it was.
Well, yeah, Uber, Lyft, Instacart, DoorDash, Postmates. There's
Uber Eats, all
and
this, yeah.
I mean, there are also these tech companies that are app-based and have drivers, and they already at the start consider them to be employees of the company, so it grants them, the health care, whatever other, I don't know if they get a 401k, but, different benefits that they already get.
The drivers?
Yeah, I forget what company it was. I was listening. It's a newer startup, I want to say.
Okay.
NPR, How I Built This podcast. I was listening to it. But...
these people, in a sense, are more inclined to work in an entrepreneurial way.
Right.
So why are you going to take that away from them?
Yeah.
Sometimes this is people's side hustle.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like your only options are to drive for Uber and Lyft and Postmates. Like, there are other options out there. And so for me, it just doesn't make sense why we're attacking these companies. Like, people have been working for them, have been seemingly enjoying it and enjoying the freedom. So I don't see why we need to intervene now.
Yep.
So
All right.
vote yes. Prop 22. Okay, next one. So Prop 23. We're almost there, guys. Promise.
We're almost there. 3 more.
This is the final of the 3. So this is the Dialysis Clinic Requirements Initiative, and it would require physicians on site at dialysis clinics and consent from the state for a clinic to close its doors.
I would vote yes on this. Dialysis clinics obviously oppose this.
Right.
And it's tricky because as much as I agree that you should allow corporations the freedom to do business without government intervention in how they conduct business, I think when it comes to healthcare, that's not necessarily the case.
Right.
So, because this is lives over livelihoods.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think we need them, and it gives the state a chance to help a business if it's down. So if a dialysis clinic is in dire need and is about to close its doors, they would need state approval to do it. And the state might step in that case and be like, hey, you have X number of people that are utilizing your facility and need it as a life or death clinic. Let's see if we can help you keep your doors open. So that gives them that option. Yeah, lives over livelihoods on this one for sure.
Yeah. So I agree. I would also vote yes on this one. I just think it should be a standard. If you're medically treating someone for something that is life or death needs, there should absolutely 100% be a physician on site.
Yeah.
It's like incredibly astonishing that that's not already a requirement, which I think is, don't get me started, but I think it's just so stupid. And I was looking also at like where a lot of the revenue comes from, and it was something like 60% of it comes from Medicare. So I'm like, yo, government's paying for your profits.
Seriously.
Have a physician.
Right.
It's incredibly stupid to me, but I think just another way that corporations get around the loophole. So yeah, I mean, vote yes, Prop 23. I think it's clear and simple, but you might have different opinions.
All right. Proposition 24. This one was also very confusing.
Yeah, it's a doozy.
This one's actually, I was looking at supporters and opposers. Mm-hmm. This one is split right down the middle. I was shocked to see well-known liberals and conservatives on both sides of this vote.
Right.
It was very interesting to me. So this is the data privacy proposition. So Prop 24 expands the provisions of the California Consumer Privacy Act and creates the California Privacy Protection Agency to implement and enforce the Consumer Privacy Act. All right, I'm going to read a little bit more on this because it is a little confusing. So a yes vote supports this ballot initiative to expand the state's consumer privacy laws, including provisions to allow consumers to direct businesses to not share their personal information, remove the time period in which businesses can fix violations before being penalized, and create the Privacy Protection Agency.
So this one, so I work in market research. I see your data every single day.
You see my data too?
I mean, realistically, no, but
Okay.
yes. So working in market research, I think has opened my eyes to like how much shit we know about a specific person. And there's even been, different articles, documentaries, whatever you call it, on how people can very easily go around these rules and like to the point where I can most likely pinpoint your exact location, your whereabouts throughout the day, what you're buying, what places you're visiting, the shopping centers you're going to, all of that stuff, like down to the T. I can know who you are, which is very scary. And so for that reason, I am a very big person on consumer privacy laws, especially, data privacy. I think it's a huge thing. But looking at this one, it didn't seem to me like it was actually helping people. So I would vote no.
Wow.
Yeah. I know, right? Shocker. I think the biggest thing that I saw was like looking at the full text of the ballot initiative. I was looking at like, when we go through these propositions, they'll do amendments, whatever, they'll like cross text out so that it no longer applies because that'll be the new proposition going forward. And so for me, I was looking at like, there's this one, a business that collects a consumer's personal information shall at or before the point of collection inform consumers as to, and it's like list A, B, C, D, E. But what they're doing is they're changing it. So instead of a business that collects consumer personal information, they're changing it to a business that controls the collection of. And so for me, that signaled a removal of responsibility to say like WhatsApp or Instagram because they're owned by Facebook. So then Facebook is, the one that's ultimately responsible for it. But if WhatsApp and Instagram are found in violation of these things, like they're not necessarily responsible. It's probably a bad example considering Facebook owns all of them. But then like other sites that I've been on, they will list out like your cookies are being tracked. In case you didn't know this, your cookies on your different websites are being tracked so that like if I wanted to, and we have done this in the past, I will know whether you've been exposed to an ad on Instagram, on Cosmopolitan website, on HuffPost, on Hulu, on Netflix. Like there's different ways of us knowing what you're exposed to, what ads you're seeing, what sites you're visiting, what key terms you're entering on your different search engines, Google, Bing, if anybody still uses that. But for me, it was like, well, the company who is collecting this data and in charge of it is responsible for it. But if that information is getting passed to another company, say it's going to Vogue or Cosmo, then it feels like they're being removed of responsibility for this. And I think the other side to this was, for me, it felt like the onus was being placed instead of companies who should do what they need to do to protect people's privacies. It feels like I am now therefore responsible to making sure they protect my privacy. But when I'm looking at, and even now, like I work in market research, I should know whether I need to opt in or out of different things, but it's so hard to tell like what I actually need to choose because you just have all this legal text and like different agreements that I'm like, I don't actually know what I'm agreeing to.
Right.
And also like, I don't want to sit there and read through everything. Like it's going to take me days before I can decide whether I download an app. So for me, I think the onus still needs to go. I think we need government regulations and laws on data privacy. I think these companies need to be held responsible and they need to have their own entities either within or an advisory board that oversees all of them to ensure that our privacy and our data is being protected. I don't think it should be an individual's responsibility to take on that because it's a huge responsibility. And we have so many different people, young to old, tech savvy to not tech savvy, legal savvy to not legal savvy to know whether they're actually being protected by agreeing to certain things. Like, unless I have a legal counsel, I'm not going to know really what I'm agreeing to. So that's why I would vote no.
All right. I would vote yes. So we do need privacy laws, and I think so. This one is Val made a lot of good points. There is a lot of fine print in this law that allows companies to get away with certain things. But my thinking is they're already getting away with them. And at least this law gives us some power over our data. And a couple main ones is that the consumer's personal information cannot be shared now if this law passes, if we request for it not to be shared. It provides consumers with an opt-out option from companies to share your data with advertisers and marketers. So again, more power to us. Right now, companies are able to map out the data of minors, and that is very scary in my mind, because if they have the data of children, who knows how they'll be able to shift societal thinking with that kind of information. So this law would also have the company obtain permission before collecting the data from anyone who's younger than 16. And it would require permission from the parent or guardian if they're going to use the data for anybody younger than the age of 13. And it also allows for them to correct the consumer's inaccurate personal information upon the request of the consumer. So even though there is a lot of fine print legal problems, and I think that's why the ACLU opposes this, because there is a lot of legal problems, but this is definitely first step. For us to think that data privacy law is going to be a home run on the first try is, I think, not likely. So I saw that Andrew Yang, who's one of the biggest advocates for data privacy, supports this, and I'm with Yang Gang on this one. So I think this is the first step in getting our foot in the door. There's always room to pass amendments to correct any of the problems that are in this bill, but to think that I don't even have the option today to tell a company, don't share my data, give me my data, don't collect my data. Some companies are good about it, like Apple give you the option to opt out, but now this will force every company to give you the option to opt out. And I think that's a great first step.
So, I mean, I'm glad you brought some of these points up, because I think that's where this proposition wants to get you, like the collection of data for minorities. We already have, we call GDPR, I forget what it stands for, but I have to know these, because if I break these rules, we get a ton of fines. So, personally identifiable information already cannot be shared for us. So when we're passing on information to, say, like third-party companies who hire us, so people like Facebook or Amazon who do actually hire us, we have to like code certain things, or we have to aggregate it so that you don't have personally identifiable information out, in the ether. It's not passing from one person to another. We already have opt-in, opt-out things. So it's like, I can choose, and the thing is, it's very hard to tell and to know that we already have these things in place, because it's like the way it's brought up to you on like a little pop-up menu or something is, for one, so annoying, and for two, not clear on what you're actually being required to opt into, that I think it seems like we don't have those data privacy issues. But California already is one of the strongest in terms of like privacy, data privacy, consumer privacy helping us. And I don't think that this proposition actually furthers what's already being done. Like I said, for me, the way that I saw it was more of like a twist. So these things that they're mentioning, like getting parental legal guardian approval for the collection of data under 18, like we're already required to do that. If it's under 13, we absolutely have to get parent legal guardian approval. Like this is a thing you have to do.
So maybe then the biggest benefit would be the creation of the agency to provide oversight and make sure that companies aren't sidestepping Data Privacy Act laws.
Maybe.
Because it would create the agency as well.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I mean, yeah, I mean, I can see that, but I just, for me, I think what was being changed in the text itself, simply to get that organization, the one that oversees, you know, the big four essentially.
Right.
I didn't see that as beneficial enough. Like, I think they still need to go back to the drawing board and fix it. And I think we need overarching data privacy laws that are implemented specifically to tech companies and startups. Like, the fact that a company can be a startup and like mine the web of our pictures, our information, and sell that to like law enforcement and other agencies, like that should not be able to happen, but it does, and it is
Right.
happening. And I don't think this solves that. If anything, I think this just further muddies the reality that we're in and makes you think that, okay, this organization will be developed and will oversee these things, but what I feel like is being changed doesn't keep the responsibility on these companies. I feel like it puts the responsibility in the hands of consumers, which, yes, we should have the responsibility and we should have that right, but they should also be responsible for adhering to all of this.
All right. Last but not least.
Woo!
We made it.
Made it.
We
Last
made it.
one.
All right. So this one, we're going to talk for about another hour on this one, I think. No. So,
No. Oh my gosh, you've already been talking for like an hour and a half.
yeah, almost an hour and a half.
I mean, we went through a lot.
Yeah, we did go through a lot. So Prop 25 is the final prop. I've lost track. Who reads this one?
I think I read this one.
Okay, you read this one. I'll go first then.
Yeah. Okay, so Prop 25, I mean, it doesn't matter either way, but Prop 25 is the replace cash bail with risk assessments. And so this prop would, just as it says, replace cash bail with risk assessments for suspects awaiting trial.
Heck yeah. I mean, no surprise that the bail bonds are the ones who oppose this.
Right.
I've always thought it was so weird that criminals on trial could walk the streets just because they had money.
Yeah.
Like, that's so weird to me. Like, how does that even make sense?
Right.
You know, supposedly the bond was, or the bail is to keep them from fleeing. Here's an idea. If you're afraid they're gonna flee, don't let them out into the streets.
Yeah.
Right? If they're a flight
absolutely.
risk, if they're a danger to society, let them go to trial first and then let their fate be decided by a jury. I mean, it just makes no sense to me. So I've been saying we need this for a long time. Again, in what world did we think it was a good idea to let money decide if a person should be walking the streets? So get rid of this 100%. And yet again, it disproportionately affects
Right.
people of color.
I feel like there's a
So,
theme going on
there is a
whenever
theme.
we talk about the justice system.
Right? Anytime we talk about prison,
Isn't that
law,
so funny?
crime,
I'm just
like,
what an odd coincidence.
yeah.
That it disproportionately affects low-income people, minorities, people of color.
So I'm guessing you're voting yes on this?
Interesting.
You're
Yes,
agreeing with me?
100%. 100% yes. If it wasn't clear before. Yeah, I just think it is so stupid. And I think, like, if they're going to be a flight risk, poor or rich, they're going to be a fucking flight risk. So
Yeah.
keep them. Like, if anything, this just harms people, like you said. It more disproportionately harms the people of color. But I think it also, like, gives people an edge who are have tons of money, you know, the white collar crimes, whatever you want to call it, I don't know, because they can pay their way out, that they can just walk along the street as if nothing happened. But
Right.
I think it's so backwards to me. I
Yeah.
mean, our whole justice system, I think, needs reform, but when we'll get there, I never know. So this one, I would vote yes. I would hope that everyone would vote yes, but then again, who knows?
Who knows?
So,
All right. I think that wraps it up. So we
Yeah.
covered a dozen propositions. Some we agreed on, some we didn't agree on. Hopefully this was informative in helping you
Oh.
make your decision.
before we end, are there any props that you would flip your vote
After this
after
conversation?
this conversation?
Wow, that's a good question actually. Hold on. Let me
I'm
go
just
back.
curious. I
Let
want
me
to
go
know.
back to my notes here. I think we had some good dialogue on the rent control one.
Mm-hmm.
I also think we had some good dialogue on the privacy, and the privacy one is maybe one I'm gonna revisit and consider changing my vote.
I think, you know, I also want to revisit that one a
Yeah,
little
that
bit
one's
further.
a tricky one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's hard. It's very hard. There's
I
so
might
much
actually have
confusing
to
text.
read the entire bill.
Ugh, I know. Yeah, honestly, if I hadn't gone into the bill, I don't think I would have voted no.
Yeah. So is that the one you might? So we're both
That
gonna
one- that
potentially flip our vote on
Yeah,
the same
that one I might.
Okay.
I was kind of hoping you might change your mind on Prop 15, but that's
Which
okay.
one was Prop 15?
The tax on commercial industries and properties.
Oh yeah, I mean, so because you did make some good points about how how the bill does have stipulations in there to make sure it doesn't affect the people that I'm worried about.
Mm-hmm.
So 15, I'll definitely look at that one too.
Yeah, I mean, they even have an exemption for small businesses
Yeah.
under 50 employees.
So you're not flipping your vote on Prop 21?
I just don't, you know, I mean, I can understand, like, I do hope in the future at some point we can have our own properties and, like, our own rental properties. And I know my parents are also going to have their own rental properties soon, but still, I think looking at what is happening right now with millions of people unemployed, I don't care how much Trump says that we've got jobs back, he's a thief and a liar, so it's bullshit.
So who are you voting for your president? Huh.
No, I just think it's for me, it's like I can't ignore the fact that there are so many people who don't know where and how they'll get the next meal on the table.
Yeah, that's
So-
something we got to look at, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want it to be a forever thing. I'm just putting that out there. Like, I do think housing is a human right. I hope that we
I
find
agree.
a way
I agree
to
on that.
solve it.
Yep.
I don't think this is a solution by any means.
So you're gonna vote no if it's not a solution.
That is you wish. I mean, I feel like it's a band-aid on the problem,
Yeah.
but it's gonna fall off soon, and so
All right,
Yeah.
you guys. So we'll wrap it up.
yeah, good conversation.
Yeah, this was great. Maybe we'll do something like this again in the future.
Yeah.
This was fun.
I mean,
enjoyed
I
it.
hope it was helpful to
Yeah,
people.
hopefully you guys have good information. You can make your own decisions, weigh your options, what works best for you for California, and
Make
any-
sure
any
to
closing
register to vote.
Yes,
if you're
register
not
to
already.
freaking register to vote. Register to vote.
There are numbers
Register to
of
vote.
ways to get your ballots counted. You can do mail-in, though. Like, I am highly suspect of the post office right now, but we'll see. There's also
Dropbox.
like official Dropbox. Please do not drop it off at some random place. Check
Yeah,
where
if
you're
you-
dropping it
Yeah,
off.
if you find a Dropbox location on a website, if it doesn't say .gov, don't take it there.
Yeah.
Make
yeah.
sure it's a .gov website that gives you a Dropbox location.
Yeah, please
All
be
right?
careful. There's a lot of misinformation going around. So you can drop it off at those select locations. You can even drop it off personally at the polls on November 3rd if you feel that that's the best way to do it. You don't need to wait in line to cast
or
your ballot.
Or you can vote in person on November 3rd.
Or you can vote in person.
Just make sure you wear a mask.
Yeah. Young people out there that are healthy, please sign up to be a poll worker. I signed up. Let's do our part. I think this is a interesting election, to say the least.
And just one final note. Regardless of what happens, okay, it's not the end of the world.
We're moving to Canada.
Oh, okay. I'm still down for that.
Still down.
But it's honestly, it's not the end of the world, all right? It's gonna suck for 50% of the country. All right? That's just the way it is. That's the way it's always been. We're so polarized now. I would just say that when you go to make your votes, do it with the premise of what's going to benefit the most amount of people and bring us together as a country, because a country divided helps nobody.
Yeah, so also vote on, we didn't cover them today, but you need to also do your own research on your local officials.
Yeah, that impacts you more than the president.
Yes.
Believe it or not.
So there's multiple levels to this. Point is, it's not necessarily just the president that counts. It's also the House, the Senate, your local officials, the props. Like, there's so many things that we need to take into consideration. So please, 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 please be active at the polls for every election, not just the presidential ones.
Yes. All right. I think we're done, right, babe? All right.
High five. We did good.
That was fun.
Awesome.
All right, you guys. Till next time.